Hi everyone. For my second book report, I read Scarcity by Senthil Mullarathan and Eldar Shafir. So this book looks at scarcity, which is just the idea that most resources have a finite amount of them, and this is true for any type of resource. So just natural resources overall, time, money, and even like mental capacity. So how much your brain can handle, how many different tasks you can handle at once. So I kind of wanted to look into how these are all affected, or how all these affect us, and kind of how some of them might be related to each other. So the first one I wanted to look at was mental scarcity. So having a lot of tasks and a lot of things on your mind can definitely hurt your ability to learn new things and do day-to-day tasks. One of the examples the book looked at was kids not being able to learn with little distractions. So they looked at two different schools. One had a train that ran by it during the day, and one that didn't. And the one train that had, or the one school that had the train run by, actually did worse on testing, and students didn't learn as much because of such a small distraction as a train going by. So this kind of led me to think about how does this affect other things. So looking at some like areas that are worse off, schools generally provide worse test scores, and this might not only this might be somewhat contributed to some of these kids not having the ability to, like, they don't know when their next meal is coming, so hunger is in the back of their mind. They don't know what they're having for lunch that day. Maybe they didn't get sent a lunch because their parents couldn't afford it, or their parents are fighting, or they only live with one parent who's working and they can't always get a lunch or have dinner that night. So that's always on the back of their mind, as well as safety. A lot of these places aren't as safe as some of the more well-off areas. So they're worried about, are they going to be able to get home safe? And all these things are kind of weighing on them. If you know Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know that those are the two things that they kind of come up with first before like self-actualization, different things like that. So learning takes a back seat to figuring out where the next meal is coming and whether they're safe or not. So this is kind of something that sits there and they're not able to learn as well. So a lot of the argument that these schools, the students aren't performing well, it might be because of some of this mental scarcity we see. And this can kind of lead to a downward spiral where these people who are in these impoverished areas aren't able to learn as well, and they aren't able to contribute to society as well. So they're kind of stuck there as well as for generations. So it's one thing. It's kind of interesting to look at a different take on kind of why these people are stuck in these situations, and it allows us to kind of look at how we can possibly try and get them out of that and break that cycle. Um, the next one we looked at kind of was money and resources. I grouped together. So the first one was looking at a box of chocolates and how people are much more likely to give away the first few chocolates in a box if someone asks. But if you only had a couple left, you'd put a lot more utility on those, even though you had the same amount to begin with and gave away the same amount. This kind of shows how bad we are at planning sometimes, and that we don't put the same utility on things when we view that we have a lot of them, even though they're all really worth the same amount. When it came to money, this was a really interesting thing to look at, and it kind of relates back to that mental scarcity, where you have too many things going on and you're not able to complete day-to-day tasks as well. So they looked at giving $150 repair that someone needed on their car and how that would affect their ability to go day-to-day. The more well-off people were fine and could complete the day-to-day tasks, and the poor, not as well-off people were also able to, because $150 isn't a huge amount of money. It makes a dent to some people, but not huge. And then they switched that up, and then they changed and made it $1,500. So that's a lot. They did a survey where only a small portion of the population would not be affected by having to come up with $2,000 on the spot. And after they told these people that they needed a $1,500 car repair, the people who were well off were able to pay it off. Obviously, no one's going to be happy about that, but they were able to continue their day to day. They didn't have to change up their routines or sacrifice things in their life. But the less well-off people had to make a lot of sacrifices. They had a lot going on, a lot more things going on mentally that they had to figure out, and they were not able to complete day-to-day activities as well. This kind of shows some of the negative side effects of people who kind of can get down in that downward spiral again, because if they have one big unexpected fee, it can lead them to them maybe losing a job or having problems in their life other way, because they have to find ways to come up with that money, and it throws them out of sync and whatnot. The last one I wanted to look at was time, and how that kind of people handle that, and how that might relate to mental scarcity as well. So the first thing we looked at was deadlines and how people kind of handle those. And we've seen both good and bad. People are really efficient when they have to meet a deadline, and you can kind of see this from procrastination, and also people just being more efficient, like I said, when they meet the deadline. But it also can show tunneling, which is the effect where people kind of only focus on the task at hand. So if you have a few things to do and one of them is due today, you're going to only concentrate on that today, regardless of whether some other things might be more important in the long run. This is something that can hurt companies if they worry too much about short-term results or getting a project done that might not be as important. It'll hurt them. It can possibly hurt their success in the long run. And it also might force them to overwork workers, which is not necessarily a good thing. We've seen from Henry Ford when he switched to the 40-hour work week, he had a lot of skeptics, but people actually are more efficient when they were only working 40 hours versus the old 60-hour work week that was kind of standard at the time. And now we're seeing that if people start working more, they will be more efficient in the short term, but eventually that fades off and they're not as productive overall in the long run. So we've seen that deadlines are good and bad, and that making people take up too much time actually hurts efficiencies in the long run. So some of these can be taken and used to advantage, like these times, knowing deadlines can make people efficient, but you also want to make sure you highlight the important tasks and make sure you're not throwing workers where they shouldn't be and overworking workers, because you're going to lose efficiency in the long run. But some of these other ones, such as mental scarcity, where kids are not learning well because they have so many distractions like hunger and safety, are tougher to figure out because it would take reallocating resources, which we've seen in the economy, can cause a lot of problems, and people aren't for it because you're taking from one person and giving to the other. Although it might be better off in the long run, trying to figure out a solution that works is not very easy with this whole mental scarcity and people not being able to manage too many tasks at once. They refer to it as bandwidth in the book. Being organized can help improve your mental bandwidth, but overall, a lot of these people these are kids that are doing it, and organizational skills are not being something that's taught to them and whatnot. So overall, it was a really interesting read to kind of get a different view on why some of these things might happen, why the poverty cycle in the United States is what it is, and also around the world. So it was a cool book to read and gave some different points of views from what I'm used to. So I enjoyed it.